Welcome back, everybody, to the weekly Dalton Collective Hangout. Today, I invited, actually, I should probably say your pet P. Well, Josh, why don't you say your pet P? I never know how to say them. Wolf something or other, right? What, are you muted?
Wolf Podlex.
Wolf Podlex.
I'm okay with Wolf Rex.
Okay.
That sounds pretty cool.
Well, I invited Josh here today to give us a little update on a couple different things. So one, the Urbit Foundation, which if you guys don't know, that's what Josh is primarily working on these days. And so, yeah, Josh, why don't you kind of take it away and give us a little update about what you've been working on, and yeah, hopefully we can have a cool conversation.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, so I'm right now technically called the interim director of the Urbit Foundation. That's partially because there is no such thing as the Urbit Foundation technically yet. It needs to be brought into existence. And so I'm wanting to help make that actually be a real thing. I came on to specifically help fix the grants program, or at least to sort of focus on it specifically. And it seemed like, in my experience trying to do some grants, there was a lot of room to more intentionally engage with the developer community. And so that's been kind of my, you bet, it's working. The idea was yeah, to really just get out there and talk to more people about Urbit all the time, which is what I've been doing. I've reached out to, I don't know how many people, but a lot. And I've had a lot of really great conversations. I've seen some really good proposals coming through, but the actual scope of the Urbit Foundation is potentially quite large. And so we're really in the process of figuring out what that should actually be and how to make the Urbit Foundation into a real thing. It's always been planned to exist. It's why there was address space allocated to it from the beginning. The question was always one of timing. What is the right time to make something like the Urbit Foundation into a real entity? And also, what is the right kind of structure for something like the Urbit Foundation? This was imagined long before some of the bigger crypto foundation debacles of the last several years that we've heard about. But I think the idea remains that there should be some organization that helps steward Urbit forward that is not necessarily explicitly tied to generating revenue like a normal corporation would be. Okay, there's a little overview of why I'm here and what I'm trying to do. Maybe we can take it from there.
So you said you were going to be focusing, at least on the short term, on grants. So can you tell us about the grants program, kind of what state it was in, and where it is sort of right now, and kind of where you see that evolving?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so when I came in, my first interaction with grants was in trying to do one, or doing one really. It did happen. I had gone through Hoon School and read the docs and thought, all right, well, I need a real project to work on, or else all of this knowledge is going to disappear. And so something that I spend a lot of time working with is a calendar. And it seemed to me like Urbit could really use a calendar because, well, calendars are actually a really important source of data. I use them all the time to figure out what the hell I was doing last week because I forget regularly. And there's all kinds of applications you can use them for. And after joining this organization, that was even further important because I had 2 calendars to maintain, and that's a whole other story. But I wanted there to be a calendar, and so I got into the Urbit community in some random channel and said, "Hey, I want to make a calendar. Does anyone want to join me?" And like 5 minutes later, someone went, "Yeah, I do." His name is Sovmet Ripsum. His name is actually Raghu, but at the time I knew him as Sovmet Ripsum, and we coordinated on figuring out how to go and build this through a group on Urbit, and we put together the proposal, never having met each other, and designed this thing and started working on it. And I still talk to him every week. He turned out to be like way more prolific than I could be, because He was 23, just graduated college. This was May, and all of his summer plans were totally dashed by the state of the world, which included traveling to Tokyo and doing all kinds of cool things in between college and a job. And instead, he ended up just writing a bunch of Hoon all day long, and naturally got really good at it. And so I kept interfacing with him and helping him along with some of the sort of interface level direction of the project, and outreach as far as figuring out where our stars were and where the payouts, like trying to get in touch with the grants program. And the general take I had was that grants was kind of an afterthought. It was something that was not getting a whole lot of attention. And to me, I thought, well, that's a shame, because it took me like 5 minutes to find this guy who was brilliant to work on this project. And the general feeling I get from being in Urbit is that it is chock full of really smart people that want to work on cool things. So how can we utilize that? And so what I thought was that, for one, it needs to be run a little bit more, at least with respect to developers, a bit more like a customer service organization, where there's a lot of time spent doing outreach, talking to people face to face, establishing relationships, and possibly, even more so than that, it's working with people, because working alone on a project is actually very hard. In my experience, when I've worked on projects alone, I tend to not finish them, because eventually I start questioning, well, is this actually worth it? Do I have the time? Does anyone care? And often, I'd get swept up with other things in life and drop them. Whereas if you have a team, if you have another person that you check in with on a regular basis and talk to, and are able to work with on something, then in my experience, things have gone a lot different. And at least with our calendar project, that I think is one of the reasons that it actually has progressed to the point that it is, which is basically done and in need of review. And so one of the things that I wanted to try and do was, and still want to try and do, and I'm working on, is being more of a presence that can work with people on their projects, go back and forth with them in a technical capacity, because I have been building applications for the last 10 years, and just be a general resource for getting things built. And so that's at the core of a lot of my ideas around really bootstrapping, not bootstrapping because it was already there, but stimulating the grants program is by being a person you can talk to that was here on your project with you and wants it to be successful.
Cool.
So,
and so for the grants that are sort of out there now, how many of them are sort of bottom up versus top down?
Well, so we have two kinds of grants that we'll take have three. There's gifts, but the kind that are usually either bottom up or top down. Actually, gifts is more bottom up. Okay, so proposals and bounties is what I want to get at here. Proposals are bottom up. That's where someone says, "Hey, I've got an idea. I'm going to propose doing this, and this is what I think it's worth." And those are important because there's so many more ideas than any top-down strategy can possibly generate. That we want to make sure that we capture those, and that there's a good on-ramp for people with ideas to make them happen. And so a proposal is meant to be, there should be a wide net of them. And if you look at the proposals right now, you'll notice that that's definitely the case. They're quite varied. They range from calendars to documentation to, there's an interesting one on there called Art by Urbit, which is a project to collect art from that appears within Urbit or is Urbit focused, or produced within Urbit. Exactly what it is yet to be determined, but there's a guy in Urbit called Nartis Fasram who is a pretty prolific creator of Urbit content. And so we thought, well, hey, if I start compiling all that and sending that out as a monthly digest, then that can be pretty cool because a lot of people seem to be into that. And that has absolutely nothing to do with development. And that's fine. And Urbit is for a lot of things. We don't even know what all those things are. And so art is certainly a potential one. So the projects there should be bottom up, and they should range widely. At times, we may also culture development, yes, a different kind of development. We should, at times, and this is something that I hope to work in very soon, do even something like a request for proposal, because there are certain projects that could be tackled in any number of ways. One that keeps coming up is, it'd be great if we had an Urbit native currency. Kenny, you talked to me about one of these that could be used for reputation, as something you could kind of tip people for, and the accumulation of which would convey some kind of social currency. Anthony brought the same idea to me and dubbed it Zodbucks. And a lot of people thought about this, and this is something where I would love to see someone propose on Urbit currency, because to really spec it out, the top-down approach, which is what bounties are, is hard and requires, it's not just hard, but it requires being opinionated. And there's only so many things that someone from a top-down perspective can impose their opinions about. And so bounties are meant to be these things that more describe a defined set of work to be done. And I think this has been a problem with bounties in the past, is that they've been very open-ended. They have not had very clear specifications. And as a result, what often comes back from a bounty is not what was in mind, because it wasn't clearly articulated. And so it ends up being a product that can't be readily integrated into whatever its intended use case was. And a great example of this was with the Bitcoin work that started basically a year ago is when these bounties first went live. And a phenomenal couple of contributors jumped on this, Pyri Kovanen, Pikova, and then later Jose, who did the vast majority of work on this. Jose did a huge amount of work on it. He wrote probably 80% of the implementation of the Bitcoin RPC API, which is an immense lift. That was actually fairly well specified because it was basically just to implement the Bitcoin RPC API, which is documented. You just make it work. But by and large, most of them were exactly what Phonics just mentioned here. They were underspecified. They were not very clear what they were supposed to be. And so there was a Bitcoin wallet implementation on there that ended up going in many directions, none of which resulted in something that we could use right away. And so the approach that I'm wanting to take with bounties is to be very specific about what it is that we want to get done with them. And if they are technical, and if they require actually building something technical, then they have to be very well specified. And so my original hope was to create a lot of these, about 3 per month, starting in September. I've managed to do 1 this month because it took really damn long. I had to figure out how Bitcoin works, which I didn't know before this, and it turns out is different than client server web applications, to say the least. It's fun. I know how Bitcoin works now, which is like a superpower. But that's part of what I think is going to be a challenge that I'm trying to figure out, is how do you come up with a clear specification for something as an individual person, given that it's actually quite hard to do that. And this is a problem for me to solve, in generating good, high quality bounties that are both leave room for someone to build something interesting, but don't end up being the wrong thing if we have something specific in mind. And so, there may be something that emerges in the interim like an RFP process that lets us say vaguely, we're looking for something in this vein, like an Urbit native currency, but we want you to think about it and propose architecturally how you're going to build it, and then own that. So you should see something like that fairly soon, actually.
Cool. And so one of the apps you mentioned was a calendar app, which I think a lot of people would agree that's pretty useful. But it also might not fit into the larger roadmap for landscape. So if, not saying that the calendar app specifically, but any app that gets fully developed, either through this grants program or sort of any other way, how might you expect people to find out about these apps or actually install them?
Yeah, it's a great question. Well, how you'd find out about it, I think right now is probably the way you find out about most things in Urbit, which is through word of mouth. People just talk about stuff. That's not good enough long term. It needs to get better. I found that, and I say that like with, knowing that I think there's probably better things we could do. It has actually worked pretty well. The bulletin board is an example of a very small primitive, like a notebook being used to promote a lot of discovery of a lot of different things. And I think with some of the work that's being done on interface, that's about to become even much more apparent in the near future. So I think that with some of the primitives we have, word of mouth, either through the things that are actually in Urbit already, like notebooks or chat, and people just talking about these, we'll get pretty far with people being able to find third-party applications that exist. As for how they'd install them, the way that you've done this in the past is you just go and find the GitHub project, you clone it down, you copy it over into your ship, and boom, it's installed. That's problematic in that you need to be a developer in order to do that, which is okay for now, because most of the people that have been in Urbit have been developers. But we're moving into a world in which that's not always going to be the case. You can also, what seems to be a good emergent strategy is you host your application on a moon, and then people can set up to sync from those, from that moon. Now, a number of people have totally broken their ships by running third-party applications that end up being not compatible with new OTAs. That's a hard problem that I don't have an answer for yet, and we'll be leaning on people like Wikdev for guidance on how we plan to actually solve this. I think there's a good amount of work that needs to be put into how you make third-party applications work very well. There's also a somewhat related sort of a process issue of, well, if I had originally thought like a calendar, man, that's a really generally useful thing, and it fits very well in the way that landscape currently works. You've got lots of small groups of people, often that are coordinating on real things, like all of you on the Dalten Collective, that would love to have like an actual way of coordinating their meeting times within Urbit. That makes a lot of sense. But it's pretty hard for someone else to go and build this calendar app, myself and SovMep, and then hand it over to the landscape team and say, hey, can you guys just like incorporate this into your product? All you have to do is read all of our code and understand it and then maintain it. It's like, no, it's not how this works. No one wants to just drop a bunch of foreign code into their code base and now become responsible for it. So I don't know how to make that like fit very well with landscape, or if it will, because developing products is hard and requires a lot of coordination and planning, and it's not clear how third-party applications can just fit into that real nicely yet. At some point, I expect there to be some kind of work put into like, what are the actual interfaces to something like landscape, and how would you plug something into it? And it would probably provide its own form of harnesses or interfaces. Like, if you implemented the leap interface, this is how you can make your application leapable. There will probably be things like that. we're not there yet because landscape is young, and it's mostly the work that's been put in there is just to make it work on its own the way it's supposed to, which is perfectly understandable. That said, there's another path towards something like this, which is that you can build applications on Urbit that don't run in landscape perfectly fine. They can just be a separate URL, which loads an entirely separate web application that is not landscape, that can actually interact with all the rest of the data that landscape uses perfectly fine. So this might be something that emerges in an intermediate phase while landscape goes through its own cooling process, which is like third-party applications that are actually totally separate web apps served by something like file server, I would expect, that have their own interface and can have their own design that doesn't have to fit with landscape. This is another problem I've heard is Galen's kind of opinionated about how things look. And so it's a lot of ask to, have someone conform to exactly what he wants, or to have, Galen do design reviews on every third-party developer's application. That's just not how it should work. So I expect that this is a strategy that needs to be more fully demonstrated, is that you can just use your Urbit like a server that serves its own web app. It's got its own interface. Yeah.
Cool. All right, so we have a number of folks here that have either participated in grants or received some or worked on them. So why don't we go open it up to everybody else here and see if they've got some questions for Josh. Don't be shy.
Yeah, no one's now.
So I'm not super technical or super apt at writing Hoon. I'm decent, but not good. But there are things that I'd like to see in Urbit, right? And so I like this idea of the request for proposals that you were suggesting. Have you thought about doing like a request for bounties, like getting a groundswell movement to suggest a type of software that could be developed, even though maybe the people looking for it aren't necessarily capable of doing that themselves?
I haven't, but it's a really good idea. And when you mention it, it's part of a larger class of things that happens because, I get people send me ideas all the time. Like I've talked to Kenny a few times, and usually those calls are like, "Hey, have you thought about doing this? Hey, Josh, could you do this? Could we do this? Could we do this?" And Kenny, you're like overflowing with ideas. There's all kinds of things that I would like to see turned into bounties. But they, just gotta write them. And what's been coming up lately is like there needs to be a big list somewhere of grantable ideas that is publicly accessible. And in my mind, the work of turning something into a good bounty that you could actually hand off to someone to go and do is almost as hard as actually implementing the thing, if you do it right. And if you do it right, it really pays off. Yes, meta bounty, like design phase, right? Designing a thing means that the implementation ends up not being a total mess. You have like a really clear path towards building something, and developers, and I've always loved when I have like I'm able to work with a designer that can provide some guidance on what it is to actually do, because left to my own devices as a developer, I often end up building all kinds of wacky things because it's like sky's the limit. I can build whatever, and you end up obsessing. When you have a spec, it's great, you just build it. So one thing I've thought of is, Creep is fun. One thing I thought of is actually, figuring out a way to reward people for doing quality design work. And I don't just mean like visual design, graphic design, but architectural design, where like I gladly would have given someone a star for writing the Bitcoin proposal that's currently up on grants or on bounties that I wrote. It took a long time. It required a lot of review from people that knew what they were talking about to get that into a good place. So I think that this is a direction that that could go in over time. Is, hey, I've got an idea. I want to see this become a real thing. Well, yeah, if you want to take an idea and go through the process of really articulating how it should work, and it doesn't even have to be technically, it can be from a user experience level, or at least these are the features it should have, these are the features it shouldn't have, these are the user stories. It's a good way to articulate that. Then for certain kinds of projects, I could certainly see that being rewardable work. Otherwise, and not everything has to be rewarded to be, or have some, sort of payment stipulation in order for it to happen, but we could do some work towards making it more open about where we collect these ideas, so that there's a clearer path to contributing the things that you want to see Urbit hold. There's been some talk on the mailing list lately about creating a sort of an Urbit Foundation group. We have the Urbit community more largely, which is focused on, like being the landing point for anyone that ends up in Urbit whatsoever. But a foundation group more focused on development of Urbit, the platform development that the foundation is working its way into doing, is probably a place where something like this could exist. Even the Urbit community group could do something like a notebook that does serve as a place to collect these kinds of ideas.
I wonder if there's a way to connect those two ideas too, like, because you make a good point. You could have people say, I would like to see X, and not have X well defined, and so that doesn't leave you so much better off than before. But maybe the request for proposals could be triggered off of those ideas that are surfacing at the top of like a most wanted list. And so you're also directing the request for proposals more with more targeting, by saying, we'd like to see proposals for the full spec design of this project, and from there we can give you the go ahead to start building that thing. Does that make any sense?
Yeah, I think so. Let me see if I heard you correctly, or at least give you so I think what you're saying is like, okay, we kind of base the request for proposal on things that we're hearing a lot of, and how, hone it in based on what people are saying a lot. Mm-hmm. Which it's good, because we have a blog post that's probably going to come out, I don't know, soon, maybe next week. There's a bunch of other stuff coming out with respect to the blog, like, posting and stuff that is sort of slipping ahead of that. But I have a blog post coming out soon, which is about commerce on Urbit, and this Bitcoin bounty that went up is part of that theme. It's like, we want commerce on Urbit to be a thing in early next year. There's a lot of ways that commerce fits cleanly into a personal server that you own, right? This is a place where a paywall actually makes a lot of sense behind some kinds of content, especially given how high trust the network is. There's a lot of ways in which currency could flow in very productive ways. So commerce is like, it's a broad concept. Part of it is just facilitating money, but another part of it is reputation. How do you know that this actor you're dealing with is a good one? I mean, the fact that they're on Urbit is a pretty good sign, but you might want to go a level further. Another one that Kenny brought up that was a really great idea was, well, this is relevant. It's joint ownership of a star. A star is meant to be a business, and a big part of a business is having partners on that business. And so, can we make tooling around the concept of joint ownership of a valuable asset like a star into something that you could natively control through Urbit and not have to go and screw with Ethereum manually? So there are a lot of different areas, and this blog post is specifically going to call out to that at the end and say, here's a bunch of ideas that I've heard that seem to keep coming up. Urbit native currency, reputation, collective ownership of a star. These are some things I want to see some proposals on, and here's some of the ideas I've heard about them. So yeah, I think if we could have these conversations, so it's not just me talking to a bunch of people and then collating everything, but if we could have the conversations more in the open, it would also really help to bring these very desired systems that someone could build to the forefront and boost that development. Especially because I think there's tons of people out there that are like just looking for things to do. And if there were a bunch of people saying, I really want this to exist, that would probably be a good sign that, hey, I can go build that. Is that
It is.
answer the
Yeah,
question?
last
Okay.
question is, how much would I get if I built an app that would let you collect those suggestions? No. just kidding. No, that's very good. That's very interesting.
I mean, polling, voting is another thing that people keep bringing up. It would be great to be able to collect little polls, which is kind of this. What was that, Christian?
The DXL wants that.
Yeah, totally. Polling and voting, there's a number of ways you could do polling. I mean, you could do like goofy little polls, for, there's probably a number of polls that would have been sort of fun in last night's presidential election debate chat. That's probably different than the kind of polling and voting that DXDAO is thinking about. So there's a number of different things we could do in this space.
Similar though, like if you could like both embed like a poll and publish and embed a poll and chat, it could use like the same like poll store or whatever, right? And just sort of link into that.
Yeah, general purpose voting mechanism, right? You could imagine, ring signature code exists. Oh shit, I didn't know that. Polling is actually, it's basically a special case of voting. Or the other way around, hard to say. Anyway, there's clearly a lot of things we could do with this. So yes, you'd get some kind of reward. I can't say exactly right now, but if you want to do that, please do. Everyone on this call probably wants you to. And it's also the fastest way to get good at Hoon, if you're just kind of good at it now, is to like go and choose a thing and build it. That's true of all coding, really.
For sure.
Well, we definitely want to make sure that people know where to go. So where does the grants program live now?
So officially it lives at grants.urbit.org. That's where you'll see most things grants related. Now, something I'm working on doing over the next few months is to make that more of a vibrant place, to get more content on bounties, to get more updates into proposals so that there's more information displayed there. There are technical challenges to that, which is that the grants site is developed by a third party. And if you're a developer and you've ever had to go and read other people's code, you know that it's often harder than if you were just building the thing. There isn't anyone that officially maintains this project, basically. So that is now also my job, and I haven't used Python since college. And so there's some things that could be improved about grants and showcased better. It's unlikely that there's going to be any major changes to the actual site in the near term. So it'd be great if we could actually just move grants into Urbit one of these days. In fact, it wouldn't be terribly difficult to do, really.
Yeah, so that was going to be my immediate question, actually. Like, are there any plans to like move that over to Urbit, even if it's just saying, oh, we're going to like implement the application and run it on a fake Zod right now, and then like eventually integrate it into the network?
Yeah, I mean, I mean, there are now. There weren't about a minute ago, but after discussing this, it seems like an obvious thing to do. we would need it to be publicly visible, because we do want grants to be something, we want to, part of what we want to showcase with grants is to the outside world that, hey, there are things going on here. People are building real things right now. And, you can get in on this. Like, please come get in on the action.
I could use like a Podlum or whatever, what the thing that Mark built that allows like basically like fake Urbit users and so on. And like basically like accessing data from Urbit without, like the usual air channel.
Yeah, you're thinking of Podium.
Podium, that's right.
I don't think you'd need that for this specifically. Like all you really want to do is just like expose some HTML pages to the outside world, and then show like, here are the grants or whatever.
Yeah.
So like it really doesn't need to be anything fancy.
Yeah. I mean, when I first came to Urbit and started using Urbit in 2016, it had that feature. It was slow, but it had it. So I know I could have it again. But haven't seen, Udon. That was so yeah, there are. That would be a much better way to like get grants into a better state, is to just dog food Urbit with it and build out grants better there. And honestly, there's probably a lot of things we could do around grants if we just used notebooks and existing features of Urbit to much better effect.
Yeah, there's an interesting pressure there when you start doing those things again. It's like, well, it was slow previously. It's probably still not going to be amazingly fast right now. And so like or at least like I've talked to a couple of people about like ways in which you can make these things fast. And there's some work has been done in that direction already. And so like this might be a good pressure to like push us to go all the way on that and say, oh, we're going to make just doing very simple HTTP page serving from your Urbit blazingly fast.
Mm-hmm.
Are external scries non-blocking yet?
No, like scries over HTTP are currently still implemented in Air, and so they come in as events and like have to go through the whole loop.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So yeah, that's like one of the things you would do is you would move that into the runtime and say, oh, the runtime's just gonna like scry for the response, like ask if the response can be given immediately and like scry for that then. And then you can like parallelize that out in the future.
I have one more question for you. I know that there are at least some groups, this one being one of them, that are looking to hopefully encourage development at some point in the future, and maybe develop revenue streams from doing development on Urbit work. How do you see the foundation handling that external pressure with your offers of address space versus other offers of potentially monetary reimbursement for doing things? Like, is that a transition of power? Are there different things that would happen in different places? Does that question make sense? Do you see what I'm saying?
I think so. Yeah. Well, let's see. So I don't expect that offering address space is going to be the only way in the future that the foundation stimulates or stimulizes development. I expect at some point in the future, the foundation will also be able to pay in dollars. I don't know when that's going to be. I don't know exactly how it will be able to do that, but address space has been converted into dollars quite successfully a number of times. That's how Twan pays people. They don't pay their rent in stars. And the foundation is also owns a bunch of address space that it can use to pay people to work on community level projects in some form of other currency. So I expect that we'll get to a point like that. I don't think that was actually the total intent of your question, though. It was also.
Well, it's sort of that. It's also like I think it would be good to diversify the rewards or incentives behind developing for Urbit, and like incentivizing groups like this to exist to bring more people in to do that development. And I guess perhaps it's even more valuable to developers to get the address space right now. And so, like, is that a transition of authority? Is there something the Urbit Foundation can do to encourage the growth of groups like this, or is that really sort of down the line and something that's not really a priority right now?
I think with most things, I think it's not quite a priority right now, just because it's very recently the case that Urbit has been something that even worked really well, and so it was hard to talk very much about, like, okay, I see your eyes, Mark. It's more like, we're getting to a point in which landscape really looks like a product that you would pay for, right? And it works pretty reliably. And that's a really important precedent to set, to show that Urbit is a platform that you can build real products on top of, that don't have to be all about Urbit, right? Up until this point, a lot of the messaging has been all about Urbit. What we want to get to a point is that Urbit is actually just this, what we all have always said it can be, which is this neutral infrastructure that happens to be a really good framework for developing good social collaborative software on. It doesn't even have to be just that, but it's part of a broader piece of infrastructure that you can build other things. And now the focus is no longer on the technology to an end user; it's on this cool thing that was built with it. And landscape, getting to that point in which it's the focus, it's a place for communities. You can build communities, and there may be, like, I would love the day in which people get on landscape and they don't even know what Urbit is. Like, they're just using this really cool community product, and it's awesome. Like, most people that use most web services don't know anything about Linux, right? They don't understand what the infrastructure is. It's invisible. It should be invisible. But I think that's an important prerequisite to getting to the point in which we can talk about products that exist on Urbit that people can build. And we're close. So it's going to be a priority. It definitely should be one, because we want there to be other companies out there that exist that can actually build a business by creating products on top of Urbit. You do need these organizing bodies, and they don't even have to be companies, right? They can be DAOs. They can be groups that own stars and have a way of transforming them into something that provides recurring revenue by providing services. That's a whole area that I think we're ripe for figuring out right now, is the infrastructural piece. Like, what kind of services can stars provide other than peer discovery and software distribution? I don't know yet. There's a number of ideas. People have talked about it. They can be, they're a more powerful, you would have it that they're probably going to be a more powerful machine that they run on, and so they can be suitable for acting as content delivery networks. Something that is sort of latent within the Bitcoin bounty that I put out is that the fact is, running a Bitcoin node it's not trivial. It has some cost associated with it. And so, as much as the Bitcoin maximalists would like everyone to be a Bitcoin maximalist, not everyone's going to do that, because administering a Bitcoin node costs something, both in time and maintenance and resources. So I expect that this is something stars can do. They can run a Bitcoin node and then provide access to that node to their children. I imagine you could extend that concept to a lot of different kinds of services that work in a similar way. And there is some gain that you get by providing these services to your kids. That's an area, though, that I think is ripe for exploration. There's a lot of possibilities around, and I'd love to see people think more about those kinds of things that could be provided by just running infrastructure that is made available to those that have access to it.
So side story there that I found interesting, the parks service, like in the national parks, will often lease land that was already there before the park was created, like on 100-year, 90-year. Actually, I think they do it like 99 years to the families. And if they ever sell it, or they can't sell it, but if they ever, if they let the property go, or otherwise don't maintain it, they lose their lease. And at the end, the Park Service actually gets it back. But you could imagine something like the Park Service can do that because it's an organization that's, roughly speaking, longer lived than any normal human. And if organizations on Urbit, like the Dalten Collective, end up being something similar to that, you could take out leases from the Dalten Collective to store very valuable content that you want to persist for, decades or something like that. So you could potentially take out a lease on a 1 megabyte of storage for 50 years or something like that. And then Dalten would store that, for 50 years. And then when the lease is up, it either goes back to the original person that put it there or just sort of expires, something like that.
Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, these are exactly the kinds of things that we need thought around. Yeah.
Cool. Any other questions from the group before we let Josh go? Cool. Well, it's been a great conversation. Thanks for coming on, Josh. And
yeah, thanks for having me.
Hopefully engage as much as we can.
Yes, for sure. Feel free to reach out to me. You probably all know my Pat P. I'll put it in here just in case you don't.
And reply to your email.
And there's also email. Yeah. Yeah, and you got my email. I'll hear from you shortly. I'm josh@urbit.org. So
cool.
If you have any questions, feel free to reach out directly.
All right. Thanks, Josh.
All right. See you guys.
Bye.
Yeah.